What's up, y'all? Roy here, and you are listening to the Clemens with a Z podcast. I'm going to start with a quote. If you can list the messed up things that have happened in your life, put them on a list, and somehow you've made it past all of that to be in a position where you can still make something happen, that's what you have in common with every hero of every story, of every autobiography. Comedian Katt Williams. When I first heard Katt Williams say this on Theo Von's podcast, I know it's funny. I'm sitting here just kind of in that space of I'm about to share a whole podcast episode, and the genesis of this is from Theo Von's podcast and comedian Katt Williams. It's wild. But that quote, when he said that, stopped me. It's the kind of truth that it kind of sneaks up on you, you know, when you're listening to something or watching something and just suddenly you're staring at your own life from like a completely different angle and you like didn't expect it at all. And that quote reminded me of the book by Donald Miller, A Million Miles in a Thousand Years. In it, Miller realizes that living a meaningful life isn't all that different from telling a good story. And in every good story, there's one thing you can't avoid: conflict. Without conflict, there's no transformation. Without a challenge, there's no change. Without resistance, there's no reason to keep turning the page. He tells this story about in the book about if you if there was a movie out about a guy who wants to go buy a car and then he just goes and buys a car and that's it. No one's going to watch that movie. And that's what I'm talking about. It's the same reason Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey shows up in myths, movies, and memoirs across every culture. The ordinary world, the call to adventure, the trials and setbacks, the mentor who steps in, the dark night of the soul, and eventually the return home, different, changed, and transformed. And here's the thing: you and I are living in that same arc, whether we see it or not. We've been dropped into our own ordinary worlds. We've been shoved and sometimes dragged into adventures and situations that we didn't ask for. We faced trials we never saw coming. And if we're still here, still breathing, and still showing up, that means we're in the middle of a story worth telling. And the thing is, though, when we're living through it, we rarely see it as a story. We don't think, yes, this is the midpoint where the hero is tested to their limits. you know? We just feel tired or stuck or like we're failing. We measure ourselves against where we think we should be, not against the reality of what we've already made it through, right? And that's the tricky part, because from inside the story, our lives, we can't see that. We can't see the arc or anything. We just see the mess. But if we allow ourselves to step back, maybe look with a storyteller's eye, maybe the mess can look different. The trials, the detours, the setbacks, they're not proof we're off course. They might be proof that we're right in the thick of the thing. Because that's when the words from Katt start to land. You can make a list of these hardest moments in your life, the heartbreaks, the losses, the blind sides, and you realize, and I realize, we're still here. That's not nothing. That's not luck. That could be resilience. And for me, when I actually pause long enough to do the inventory, it always changes something. Now, it doesn't erase the gap between where I am and where I thought I'd be, but it reframes it. It gives me this strange, quiet confidence. Because if I've made it through that, then maybe I'm already carrying more strength than I've ever given myself credit for. So let's talk about movies and stories and books. A good one always runs on conflict. That's what the author Donald Miller realized in his book, A Million Miles in a Thousand Years. He thought he wanted a comfortable, pain free life. But when he tried to live that way, he found his life wasn't much of a story at all. No challenge, no change, no plot worth following. Think about the books that you love, the movies you go back to, the stories that stick. They all have this conflict baked into it. Frodo carrying the ring and nearly collapsing under its weight. Katniss taking arrows, loss, and betrayal before she ever finds freedom. Walter Mitty running after a photograph and finding himself instead. None of these stories are great because the characters had it easy. They're great because the characters faced resistance and didn't give up. Joseph Campbell noticed the same thing across myths from every culture. He calls it the hero's journey. I talk about it a lot. I'm going to talk about it again. But they follow a rhythm, the hero's journey. It always starts in an ordinary world. They're called into an adventure, often unwillingly. They stumble through trials and failures that push them to the edge. They hit that breaking point. He calls it the dark night of the soul, where it seems impossible. And then somehow they rise, they return, and they come back changed. Now, we all, in our stories and in our lives, just want to fast forward past the middle. We want the montage version of our lives. You know, those 3 minutes in a movie where, it shows all these things happening in a little bit. They're my favorite parts of movies. You know, in those montages, the pain gets edited out, and then we want to just cut to the triumph. But the middle, the mess, that's where the hero is actually made. And this isn't just about them, it's about us. If your life were a movie right now, what would the audience be watching? Sorry, I just thought about if they said this 30 minutes ago and me eating a breakfast burrito while watching TV. But what would they be watching? Would they be watching the setup, the calm before the storm? Would they be watching the trials, the moments where everything seems stacked against you? Or maybe they'd be watching that darkest moment where it feels like there's no way through. Now, wherever you are in that, it's not meaningless. It's not proof that you're failing. It's just proof that you're still in the story. So, personally, I want to share one of my stories, one of my conflicts. And I haven't told this story publicly a lot, but this happened to me back in college. It was right at the end, near the end of my program during student teaching. Now, I was student teaching, and our class was supposed to go on a field trip. Now, my coordinating teacher that I was with couldn't be there because she was in a meeting, and it was an IEP meeting, and the student they were meeting about was an autistic student who struggled with schedule changes, and the student was actually on the trip. Now, students with those challenges absolutely deserve to go on field trips. I agree with that. But in this case, it wasn't really set up to win from the start. The special education teacher that would go with this student was tied up in the meeting about him. And there wasn't really another option, so the decision was made to just put the student on the bus and send him along. Now, they did at least have the sensitivity to assign a substitute teacher to walk with him and try to help. But the reality was this was just a bad idea. I could see it, and I had no control over it because I was a student teacher. From the whole beginning, this thing felt like it was going to collapse. You just had a student teacher on a field trip with a bunch of kids, a couple of substitutes, no real backup. I was nervous, I was stressed, and with my coordinating teacher absent, I felt completely exposed just trying to keep it together and make it through the day. Now we get to the school, the field trip. We were going to go watch this performance at a high school. We get there, we sit down, and about halfway through the performance, the student was starting to struggle. Now, the substitute took the student and walked him out into the lobby, and I was like, okay, great, this is going to go fine. But then 10 minutes later, she came back, but she came back without the student. She told me she couldn't handle it. She needed me to go out there. So I, in turn, walk out into the lobby to where I see two high school students holding this kid down, one of them trying to take a video of it. I freaked out. I yelled at the high schoolers. I did what I could try to do to calm things down. And here's the thing. I wasn't thinking as a student teacher in that moment, worrying about rules or boundaries. I was thinking as a human being. This was a kid in crisis, scared out of his mind, being restrained by strangers, so students. Stepping in wasn't a choice. It was the only decent thing anyone could do. And you could be asking, why would you even think about that? But there are a lot of rules in place to protect students with needs. And to be a student teacher in this moment who doesn't have the licensing or the capabilities is a big deal to step in and try to help a kid. So it was scary. But I was like, okay, the substitute's probably with me, all that stuff. We're going to get through this. But then I turn around and realize I was completely alone. Because what I didn't realize was the substitute teacher didn't walk with me. The substitute teacher just sat down inside the theater. The teacher literally left me standing there in the middle of a lobby with this student in a full meltdown. In a school that we weren't from, in a part of town we didn't know where we were at. And what was I supposed to do? What would you do? If I didn't step in, if I didn't do everything in my power to keep this kid safe, this kid could have bolted out the doors into a neighborhood that none of us knew. He could have been lost or worse. The weight of all of it hit me all at once. I wasn't trained for this. I wasn't supported. I was just a student teacher. But in that moment, like I said, none of it mattered. I was the only thing standing between this kid and danger. And it felt like an eternity sitting there trying to calm this kid down, doing whatever I could. But then someone showed up. It's almost out of nowhere. A teacher walked in to this lobby to see what was happening. And the crazy part, I still laugh about this. It was my old 8th grade history teacher. Of all people, this person just shows up. He looked at me, saw the panic in my face, saw the situation I was in, and immediately asked if I needed help. Pretty sure he knew I needed help. I was like, yes, I need someone, please. So he calls the office, and within minutes, there was a school security officer and a couple of administrators came, and they were able to take the student to the office to try and calm him down. Just like that, it was over. They had the student, but I was left there in the lobby, shaking, trying not to cry, feeling completely wrung out. But then I had to pull myself together and walk back in to rejoin the rest of my students, the substitute that had left me, and pretend like everything was fine. When inside, nothing was fine. And so what happened next was worse than I was expected, because when I finally made it back to the school with the kid after the field trip, the student was safe, everything had calmed down. I wasn't calm, I was wrecked. My hands were still shaking, the room felt like it was spinning. I didn't know what was going on. And then I tell my coordinating teacher what happened, and it was like she didn't even care. She brushed it off like it was no big deal, like I hadn't just been left completely alone with a child in crisis. Now, that hurt, and it was more than I can explain because I was visibly shaking, and it felt like she couldn't be bothered by this. So I go home that day, and I call the person that's in charge of my student teaching program at the university, and I laid the whole thing out, every detail. This person understood immediately. They knew that this was not okay. This was illegal. being a student teacher left alone with an autistic child in meltdown should never happen. She told me the first thing that I shouldn't go back to school the next day. They were going to sort things out, and I felt some relief, like maybe someone was going to protect me. But what I didn't know already was that things were happening already behind my back. Because I called my coordinating teacher, told her that I talked to my supervisor, that I wasn't going to go into school the next day, all of those things. Well, before my university coordinator could reach out to the school, the coordinating teacher had already talked to the principal. She got there first. I don't know if she spun the story or whatever, but the principal, I believe, known that this was going to be a big mess. Like, they let this thing happen. There's a lot of legality issues. This was a big mess. And so I think the principal, realizing how bad this could look legally, went into cover up mode. Instead of owning what happened, instead of protecting me and the students, they decided it was easier to throw me under the bus. They made up a story, and the principal said that I was a lazy, bad influence, wasn't working hard. None of this was true, but it didn't matter. Because when you're in the student teaching program, a principal's word carries more weight than the student teacher. And just like that, because of what the principal said, I was kicked out of my program. And the part that gutted me the most about this is because when you're kicked out of student teaching, it's not just a failed semester. You have to wait an entire year to try again. I was 2 months away from graduating. 2 months away. And I went from that to staring down another 12 months before I'd even have a chance. Now, for me, this was tough because college has been hard. It was never a straight line. It took me 13 years, yes, 13 years in college to find a path, a purpose, a reason to stay in school. I mean, I quit like 3 times. Seriously. And I finally landed on teaching. Felt like something had clicked for the first time. This is what I wanted to do. This is what made all of those years of struggle worth it. So to be standing right there at the finish line with my cap and gown practically within reach, and then to see it snatched away because a principal decided it was easier to protect the school than me, crushed me. This is one of the darkest moments of my life. I can still remember the weight in my chest, the disbelief, the hopelessness. After all those years, wandering, false starts, finally felt like I had my place, and then in an instant it was gone. It really felt like the dark night of the soul. Now, the story doesn't end there. Um, I had to fight for it. I decided to fight for it every single day. I knew that I had to get through this and that I couldn't face or just accept what had happened. I had to stand up for myself. And I had to stand up for myself in ways I'd never done before. I had to sit in meeting after meeting after meeting. I had to face professors, administrators, people in power who already had their minds made up, and I had to insist with everything in me that what happened was not a reflection of my character as my ability as a teacher. And I'm going to be honest with you, I was never much of a fighter before this. That just wasn't me. I avoided conflict wherever I could. I didn't like standing up to authority. I didn't like pushing back. But in this moment, I didn't have a choice because if I didn't fight, everything that I had worked for would have been gone. And it wasn't just one conversation because for weeks, all I heard was no. No, there's nothing we can do. No, the decision has already been made. Every door I pushed on seemed to slam in my face. I had so many conversations with people who were trying to help, but no one knew how to actually move things forward. I can remember I met 7 deans at my school trying to help. 7. I went all the way up the chain. I almost met the president of the college. It was wild. And I even at one point, I even had a friend ask if he wanted me to take my story to his buddy who worked at the newspaper just to shine some light on it. Like, that's how desperate it got. I was ready to go public if that's what it would take. Now, meanwhile, my life outside of school was already moving forward without me. My now wife had already moved to Virginia to start her career, and the plan was for me to graduate and join her. But now I'm staring at a plan that was collapsing. I was stuck, I was confused, I was angry, I was exhausted. But I also knew that I couldn't quit. Not here, not now, not after 13 years of clawing my way through college just to find a path that finally made sense. So finally, we get to this point after all of these conversations where one dean sat down with me, heard everything I had, and admitted that he wanted to give me a chance. But it was so late in the semester, graduation was like a month away now, and no principal was going to let a student teacher come in to their school that late. He had even made some calls for me on my behalf, but none of them could do it. And that's when I mentioned that my dad was a teacher, and it was the one county that the dean didn't have pull in. And I asked if my dad can find a principal willing to take me, would that be enough? The dean said yes. Sure enough, my dad found one. I probably will, or maybe talk a whole episode about that, about my father stepping in to help me in that moment. But this principal that he found was one who respected him, the one who understood the situation, the one who trusted my dad, and the one who was willing to step in and help me finish. That opened door. That's what finally worked. Now, it didn't erase the fight. Like, it took every one of those conversations, every rejection, every meeting, every ounce of persistence. But in the end, it was the combination. My refusal to quit, my dad coming through at the 11th hour that saved it. And because of that, I was able to finish my program, walk across the stage, and frickin' graduate. And while I didn't love, I struggle, like, I still hate that I went through that. I can look back now, and I can see what that gave me. I can see the confidence that it gave me when I didn't have any before. And I can look at it now, and I can reframe how I see conflict in my life now, not as just something painful, but as something that shapes us, sharpens us, and reveals strength that we didn't know that we had. Because that season taught me something that I didn't know I needed to learn. Because up until then, I thought conflict was something to avoid, something that only brought pain and setback. But walking through all of that showed me that conflict, as brutal as it feels in the middle, can also be the very thing that calls strength out of us that we didn't know that we had. And yeah, I wasn't a fighter before this. I didn't know how to stand on my ground in the face of people who were bigger, louder, and more powerful than me. I was taught to shrink back. I was taught that the people in power know more than me. But in that season, I learned what it feels like to keep showing up, even when the answer is no. I learned what it means to lean on the people who believe in you when you can't carry it yourself. And I learned that sometimes survival itself, just not quitting, is its own kind of victory. Because this was my own hero's journey. I am forever changed because of that. But looking back, that's what I see exactly what the conflict does. It pushes us, it sharpens us, it reshapes us, and it strips away who we thought we were. And sometimes it introduces us to the person that we never realized that we could be. And that's why this story sticks with me after all these years, and I want to share it with y'all because when I hear Katt Williams say that quote that if you list the messed up things you've been through and you're still standing, still making something happen, that's what you have in common with every hero of every story. That's what was happening to me then, and I believe this is what's happening to all of us. And that's the thing about conflict. It doesn't just create obstacles, it creates us. It forces us to live, if we choose, forces us to live a better story than the one we'd write for ourselves if everything stayed easy, clean, and predictable. Because every great story has conflict. And without it, the story just isn't worth telling. Nobody wants to read about a character who wakes up, eats breakfast, and everything goes smoothly. That's not a story, that's a diary. What makes stories the struggle, the challenge, the conflict, the conflict that changes the character from who they were at the beginning to who they become at the end. And I look back at that season of my life and see that it was my own hero's journey. For me, though, and Campbell talks about that call to adventure. For me, it wasn't glamorous. And I know probably the stuff that we're in doesn't feel glamorous either. Being thrown into a field trip with no support, no safety net, no control. The ordeal came that came when I was betrayed, abandoned, and told I had to wait a year. That dark night when I thought everything was lost. And the fight to graduate, that was my trial by fire. It tested me, it stretched me, and it demanded something of me that I didn't even know I had in me. But like I said before, the thing about the hero's journey is the hero never comes back the same. They return with wisdom, strength, or a gift to share. And I think that's what I gained in the end. I came back different. I came back knowing I could fight, that I could endure, that I could carry myself through conflict instead of folding under it. And maybe that's the point of conflict in all of our lives. It's not just something to survive, it's something that can transform us. It's how ordinary people become heroes of their own stories. And you can too. So here's where this lands for me, and I hope lands for you. Conflict isn't just the junk we wish we could skip. It's the very thing that shapes us into who we're becoming. It's the part of the story that makes us worth rooting for. And I know it doesn't feel like that in the middle of it. In the middle of it, conflict feels like all sorts of things, like failure, like loss, like being stuck in a story you never asked for. But I know when I look back now, I can see it. Those seasons of struggles, they weren't wasted. They were doing something in me, teaching me how to fight, how to endure, how to trust myself when the ground gave way. And I wonder if that's true for you. Think about the conflicts that you've walked through, the setbacks, the heartbreaks, the moments you thought would undo you. What if you look back at those as not just scars? What if you look back at it, the markers of the hero's journey you're living? What if those moments, as painful as they were, are the proof that you're still standing, still showing up, still moving forward? And that's what Katt Williams was getting at when he said that quote. I'm going to say it again. If you can list the messed up things you've been through and you're still standing, still making something happen, still putting one foot in front of the other, I added that part. That's what you have in common with every hero of every story. You might not feel like a hero, but maybe you don't have to. Maybe it's enough to know that every fight you've come through, every no you've outlasted, every season that didn't break you, that's all part of your story. That's the conflict making your life worth telling. So I think the invitation is to stop resenting it, conflict, start asking, what is this shaping in me? Who am I becoming, or who do I want to become on the other side of this? Who do I want to become? That's where the real story is. And that's where I'll leave it today. Yeah, we don't love the conflicts we've faced, the struggles, all of that. We wouldn't have chosen them. But the fact that we're still here, listening, living, growing, existing, that matters. That's success. That's the measure. Okay? And I'll leave it with a question. When you look at the conflicts you've been through, what strength have they revealed in you? What has surviving them shown you about who you are and who you are becoming? Thanks so much for listening to today's episode of Clems with a Z. If something in this conversation resonated with you, I would love to hear from you. You can email me at clemswithaz@gmail.com or just send me a DM over at Instagram at the Clems with a Z podcast page. If you want to support the podcast, the easiest, quickest way to support the show is by subscribing, rating, and leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Share it with a friend, post it on your socials, drop it in a group chat. It all helps more than you'll ever know. If you want to support the podcast financially, you can head over to clemswithaz.com. There's a merch store there with shirts, stickers, all kinds of stuff. Every little bit helps. You can also donate directly through a GoFundMe I've set up through for this podcast. The link's in the show notes. Every little bit goes a long way in helping keep these conversations going. Also, if you're looking for something else, you can check out my Substack, Devotions for the Deconstructing and Disillusioned. That's where I share short reflections, articles, devotionals, and some behind the scene things and thoughts that don't always make it on the podcast. This podcast keeps going because of listeners like you showing up, engaging, and passing it on. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being a part of this messy middle with me. So until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Peace.